On July 23, 2007, 24-year-old Amanda Rose set off for a one-week hike on the trails of Olympic National Park in Washington state. She was an experienced hiker. She had completed dozens of routes along the West Coast, owned the proper equipment, and was in strong physical condition. She planned to trek the Hoh Rainforest Trail, one of the most beautiful and most remote parts of the park, a temperate rainforest where trees reach 50 meters, 164 feet, and humidity feels almost tropical. The route typically takes 5 to 7 days, far from civilization, rarely crossed by tourists or patrolling park rangers. Amanda checked in at the park entrance, filled out the route form, listed her planned stops, and marked her return date, July 30th. The ranger at the gate, a middle-aged man with a gray beard, inspected her gear, issued her a permit to camp only in designated sites along the trail, warned her about bears and the importance of storing food in bear containers, and wished her a safe hike. Amanda drove to the trailhead, parked her car, locked it, hid her keys under the front wheel in a magnetic lockbox, slung her backpack over her shoulder, and disappeared into the forest. The first 2 days passed without incident. She followed a clearly marked path, stopped for lunch near streams, photographed the forest and wildlife, deer, squirrels, and once spotted a bear in the distance that paid her no attention. She camped at official sites, set up her tent, cooked dinner on a portable stove, and wrote her thoughts in her journal. She crossed paths with a few other hikers, a middle-aged couple, a group of students, a solo man with a camera. They exchanged brief greetings, commented on the weather or trail, and moved on. On the evening of July 25th, the third day of her hike, Amanda stopped at campsite number 7, a small clearing deep in the woods, equipped with a wooden table, a fire pit, and a basic outdoor toilet. She pitched her tent, cooked dinner, and sat by the fire when she heard footsteps. A man emerged from the trees wearing a park ranger uniform, green shirt with a National Park Service emblem, pants, boots, and a wide-brim ranger hat. A radio, flashlight, and knife hung from his belt. He was around 45, tall, solid build, salt and pepper dark hair, weather-roughened skin, gray eyes, and an alert, observant stare. He introduced himself, James Carter, a ranger on patrol checking on hikers in the area. Amanda showed him her permit. He reviewed it and nodded. He asked if she was alone, where she was from, and where she was headed. She answered that she was solo, from Seattle, and planned to hike the full Hoh Rainforest route to the coast. James said it was a great but challenging trail, warned that it would get rougher ahead, and advised her to be cautious when crossing streams after rainfall. He sat by the fire for about 10 minutes. They talked briefly about the park, the wilderness, and the life of a ranger. Then he stood, said goodbye, continued down the trail, and vanished into the dark. Amanda went to sleep around 10 p.m., crawled into her sleeping bag, and zipped the tent closed. The forest sounds lulled her to sleep, leaves rustling, an owl calling far off, a nearby stream bubbling softly. Exhausted from a long day, she drifted off quickly. She woke to a sound, sharp and violent, like fabric ripping open. Moonlight barely leaked through the tent walls. Then it came again. She realized someone was slicing the tent from the outside. A blade cut through the material. She tried to scream, but a gloved hand clamped over her mouth. Another hand locked around her throat, squeezing the air from her lungs. She kicked, fought, thrashed, but the strength was nowhere close to equal. A large male body pushed through the tear. In the dim light, she saw a face. James Carter, the same ranger from earlier. He held her still until she stopped resisting, passing out from lack of air. He loosened his grip just enough for her to breathe, but kept her mouth covered. With practiced speed, he tied her hands behind her back, tight, efficient knots. Then her legs. He gagged her with a strip of cloth and secured it behind her head. He dragged her out of the tent, hoisted her onto his shoulder, and carried her into the forest. Amanda struggled, twisting and squirming, but tied up and drained, she was powerless to stop it. Screaming was useless. The gag muffled every sound, and there was no one anywhere close who could hear her. He carried her for 20 minutes, maybe half an hour, off-trail through thick woods, pushing through brush, crossing a stream, climbing a hill. Finally, he stopped and set her down. They were standing in front of a small wooden building, something like a cabin or storage shed, hidden between trees. The roof was layered in moss, the walls aged and darkened by time. James pulled a key from his pocket, unlocked the door, dragged her inside, shut it, and locked it again. The air was damp, and it smelled of wet wood and humidity. James lit an oil lantern mounted on the wall. The flame filled the room with a dim amber glow. One single room, roughly 4 by 5 meters, 13 by 16 feet, plank floor, log-style walls, a metal stove in the corner, a stack of chopped firewood beside it, a basic table, one chair, and a narrow bed on the opposite side. Tools hung from the wall, an axe, a saw, a hammer, chains. No windows, just the locked door. He removed her gag. She screamed. He slapped her across the face. Not full force, but enough to shut her up. Calm, quiet, almost flat. He explained that screaming wouldn't change anything, that they were deep in the forest, that no one would hear her, that if she screamed again, he'd cover her mouth and leave her tied up. His voice was steady and hollow, like he was explaining the rules of a game. Amanda, trembling, asked why he was doing this. James didn't answer right away. He just stared at her for a long time. Then, without emotion, he said he needed company, that he'd been alone for years, that he was sick of the isolation, that she would stay here now, live here, and eventually adjust to it. He told her no one would find her, that the cabin was far off the trails, that he knew the park like the back of his hand, that search teams would look in the wrong places, that everyone would assume she got lost, fell into a canyon, or that her body was swept away by the river. He unchained her feet, but not her hands. He grabbed a heavy chain from the wall, clipped one into a steel ring embedded in the floor beside the bed, wrapped the other around her ankle, and sealed it with a lock. The chain gave her about 2 meters, 6 to 7 feet, of movement inside part of the room, but nowhere near the door. He untied her hands so she could eat and move, but warned her, if she tried to run, fight, or escape, he'd tie her back up and leave her without food or water for days. And that was how life in the cabin began. The first days were hell. James came twice a day, morning and night, dropping off food and water, removing the bucket she used as a toilet, replacing it with a clean one. The meals were basic: canned goods, bread, sometimes fresh fish he caught in the stream and cooked over the stove. Water in bottles, cold, straight from a spring. He barely talked. Mostly orders: eat, sleep, be quiet. When he left, he locked the door from the outside and left her alone for hours. At first, Amanda still fought back. She screamed, begged to be freed, threatened that he'd be found, arrested, punished. James didn't react. One time she screamed louder than ever. He tied her up, gagged her again, and left her for 2 days with no food. When he returned, he asked if she'd behave. She nodded, starved, terrified, shaking. He fed her, unbound her. After that, she screamed less. She'd learned the truth. Resistance only made it worse. The first rape happened on the 4th night. James walked in at dusk like always, carrying dinner. He set the plate on the table, sat in the chair, watched her for a long silent stretch. Then he stood, grabbed her by the arm, yanked her to the bed. She clawed, bit, thrashed, but he was stronger. He hit her again and again, then tied her wrists, forced her onto the mattress, and raped her violently, ignoring every plea, every scream, every tear. When he was done, he untied her hands, walked out, and locked the door behind him. Amanda lay on the bed, crying, shaking from shock and pain. She realized this was not the end, that it would happen again, that she was trapped in a cage with no way out. She thought about suicide, searched for a way to hang herself with the chain, to cut her wrists. But James never left anything sharp behind. The chain was too short to reach the beam in the ceiling. All she could do was suffer, wait, and hope that someone would find her. When Amanda did not return from her hike at the agreed time on July 30th, her family in Seattle began to worry. Her father called the office of Olympic National Park and reported that his daughter had not checked in and had not returned home. Park rangers reviewed the registration records, found Amanda's route plan, and confirmed that she was supposed to finish her hike on July 30th. They organized a search. A team of 10 rangers and volunteers searched the route through the Hoh Rainforest, checked all marked campsites, and looked for any signs of her presence. At campsite number 7, they found her tent slashed open. The items inside were untouched: sleeping bag, sleeping pad, clothes, food. Her backpack lay next to the tent. Its contents were still there. Aside from the cut tent, there were no signs of a struggle. On the ground were shoe prints matching Amanda's size, as well as larger men's footprints leading from the tent into the forest, but they disappeared after about 50 meters on a rocky stretch. The search was expanded. Tracking dogs and a helicopter equipped with a thermal imaging camera were deployed. The area around the campsite was searched within a radius of 15 kilometers. Rivers, ravines, and caves were checked. Her car was found in the parking lot, untouched. The keys were still in the magnetic box. Inside, everything was in order. There were no signs of trouble. This confirmed that something had happened on the trail, not before it. After 2 weeks, the search was called off. The official version stated that Amanda Rose had gotten lost in the forest, may have fallen and been injured, died from hypothermia or dehydration, and that her body had been carried away by a river or eaten by animals. The case was classified as an accident. The investigation technically remained open, but the active search was stopped. The family did not give up. They hired private investigators, placed advertisements, and offered a reward for information, without success. In the cabin, time passed slowly. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Amanda lost all sense of time. She no longer knew the date or even the month. James did not give her a calendar and never spoke about the outside world. The only markers of time were the changing seasons. Summer heat gave way to autumn chill, then to winter cold, when the cabin had to be heated every day to keep from freezing. Then spring came again, and summer returned. James came every day, morning and evening. He brought food, water, sometimes fresh vegetables and meat. He hunted deer, fished. He cooked on the stove, sometimes ate with her, sat at the table, chewed in silence, and stared into nothingness. He spoke rarely, mostly about practical matters. More firewood needed to be gathered. The roof needed repairing after rain leaks. He said almost nothing about himself. He answered Amanda's questions with single words or not at all. The rapes happened regularly, 2 or 3 times a week. After the first few months, Amanda stopped resisting. She realized that resistance only made him angry and led to beatings and additional humiliation. During the assaults, she learned to mentally shut down, to retreat into herself and imagine that she was somewhere else, that this was not happening to her. It was the only way to preserve at least part of her mental health. The chain around her leg rubbed her skin raw, leaving an open wound that became infected and began to fester. James noticed it one day, brought ointment, treated the wound, and bandaged it. He said he didn't want her to die from an infection. She needed to take care of herself. He gave her soap, a cloth, and a bucket of water to wash. Once a month, he allowed her, under his supervision, to wash in a nearby creek. He removed the chain but kept a knife ready and warned her that he would catch and punish her if she tried to escape. She tried to start conversations, to learn more about him, to understand his motives, to find a way to influence him and convince him to let her go. She asked him why he was doing this, whether he had a family, why he was alone. James answered only briefly and reluctantly. Once, after about 6 months of her captivity, as they were sitting by the stove on a cold winter evening, he told her a little about himself. He had been a ranger for 20 years and had worked in various parks, the last 10 years in Olympic Park. He had been married and had a daughter. His wife had left him 15 years earlier, taken their daughter with her, and said that he spent too much time in the forest. She was tired of the loneliness and wanted a normal life in the city. They divorced. The daughter grew up, no longer had any contact with him, lived on the East Coast, was married, and had children of her own. He was left alone, working, living in a ranger cabin, going on patrols, meeting tourists, helping lost hikers. Life was empty, monotonous, meaningless. Then, about 3 years earlier, he met a tourist who was walking through the park alone. They talked. She was beautiful, intelligent, and laughed at his jokes. He offered to accompany her on one of the routes and show her places that ordinary tourists never got to see. She agreed. They set off together, spent the day together, and in the evening he invited her to his cabin and suggested she stay there overnight instead of sleeping in a tent. She agreed. There was intimacy, voluntary and pleasant for both of them. In the morning she left and promised to write to him. She never did. He waited a week, 2 weeks, a month, nothing. He realized that for her it had only been a casual affair. Just fun, nothing serious. After that, he began to think that all women were the same, that they used men and then left, abandoning them alone. The anger grew and accumulated. When he saw Amanda at the campsite, beautiful, young, alone, something clicked in his head. He decided that this time the woman would not leave, that he would make sure she stayed with him, whether she wanted to or not. That was how it began. Amanda listened and was horrified. She understood that she was dealing not just with a criminal, but with a man whose psyche was broken, who lived in a distorted reality in which kidnapping and violence were justified by his loneliness and his grievances. She understood that it was useless to try to convince him to let her go with logic or moral arguments. All she could do was wait for a mistake, for the moment when she could escape. A year passed, then a second. Amanda adapted as best she could to life in captivity. She established a routine. She got up at sunrise, when light filtered through the cracks in the walls, did simple exercises to stay in shape, washed her face with cold water, and ate whatever James had left her for breakfast. During the day, she tried to keep herself occupied. She read the only book James had brought her at her request, an old, worn-out novel, counted the floorboards, tried to meditate so as not to go mad from boredom and isolation. In the evening, when James came, she talked with him, tried to be compliant, sometimes smiled and thanked him for the food, not out of love or because of Stockholm Syndrome, but in order to survive. She knew that he could become even more malicious and cruel if she was constantly hostile. It was better to play a role, to appear submissive, and to wait for a chance. The chance came in the third year, in the fall of 2010, in early October. James came as usual in the morning, but he looked unwell. His face was pale, he was breathing heavily and coughing. He said he was sick, probably with a cold, and that he would bring more food so he wouldn't have to come for a few days until he recovered. He brought several cans of food, bottles of water, and firewood for the stove. Then he left and locked the door. For 3 days, he did not come. On the fourth day, Amanda heard the sound of a key in the lock. The door opened. James came in, swaying, holding onto the doorframe. His face was gray, his eyes feverish, his whole body trembling. He reached a chair, dropped into it, and breathed heavily. He said he felt very bad, that he needed medication, but there was none in the cabin, that he would have to go to his ranger cabin where there was a first aid kit. But he no longer had the strength. Amanda moved toward him as far as the chain allowed. She asked if she could help him. James looked at her with dull eyes and slowly nodded. He said that if she took off the chain, she had to promise not to run away, to help him get to his cabin and bring back the medicine. If she ran away, he would die here, and she would remain locked inside and also die, because the door was locked from the outside and he had the key in his pocket. Amanda understood that it was a trap, but also a chance. She promised not to run away and to help him. James took the key for the lock on the chain out of his pocket, bent forward with difficulty, and opened the lock. The chain fell to the floor. For the first time in 3 years, Amanda felt freedom of movement, no more weight on her ankle. She helped James to his feet. He leaned on her shoulder, and they left the cabin. Outside, it was daytime. The sun shone through the treetops. The air was fresh and cold. For the first time in 3 years, Amanda saw the sky, the forest, and felt the wind on her face. For a moment, she wanted to run immediately, but she knew that without the key, she would not be able to get out, and that James, even sick, could be dangerous. He could catch her or lock the door so that she would be left outside, where she could get lost and die in an unfamiliar forest without equipment and food. They walked slowly. James leaned heavily on her. His steps were unsteady. They walked for 20 minutes along a barely visible path through the forest, crossed a stream over a wooden bridge, and went uphill. Finally, they reached another cabin, larger than the first, with windows, a porch, and a sign on the door. James took out a key, opened the door, and they went inside. Inside, there was a normal room, a bed, a table, chairs, shelves with books and equipment, a radio on the table, and a first aid kit on the wall. James pointed at the first aid kit and said that there were antibiotics and fever reducers inside that needed to be taken. Amanda went over, opened the kit, and saw medications, bandages, and instruments. She took a package of antibiotics and brought it to James. He swallowed a pill and washed it down with water from a bottle standing on the table. Then he said he needed to lie down. He felt bad. He lay down on the bed and closed his eyes. His breathing was heavy and irregular. Amanda stood there, looking at him, her thoughts racing. This is a chance. He is weak. Maybe he will lose consciousness. I can take the keys, escape, and find my way to civilization. On the table lay a radio that she could use to call for help. She went to the table, took the radio, and turned it on. Static, crackling, then a voice. The dispatcher asked who was on the line and what the situation was. Amanda pressed the transmit button and began to speak. Her voice was trembling, her words jumbled. She said that she was Amanda Rose, missing for 3 years, that she was being held captive by Ranger James Carter, that he was sick, that she was in his service cabin, and that she urgently needed help. The dispatcher did not answer immediately. The pause lasted several seconds. Then a cautious voice asked whether this was true and whether she could confirm her identity. Amanda gave her date of birth, her address, the names of her parents, and other details that only she could know. The dispatcher said that help was on the way, that that she should stay where she was and not move, and that a helicopter would arrive in 20 minutes. Amanda put the radio down and turned around. James was standing behind her. He had gotten up from the bed. His face was angry, distorted. In his hand, he held a knife that he had taken from the table. He said that she had betrayed him. She had promised not to run away. Now everything was over. He would go to prison. She would pay for her betrayal. He lunged at her, the knife raised to strike. Amanda jumped back, grabbed a chair, and threw it at him. The chair hit him on the shoulder. James stumbled and fell to his knees. She rushed to the door, ran onto the porch, and ran down the path, not knowing where it led. Anything, just away from him. She ran and heard screams and footsteps behind her. James ran after her, injured but still fast, because he knew the forest. Amanda ran with all her strength. Her feet tripped over roots. Branches whipped her face. Her lungs burned, but fear gave her strength. She ran into an open clearing, stumbled, and fell. She turned around. James was 20 meters away, running with a knife in his hand, his face twisted with rage. Then she heard a sound. The sound of a helicopter, loud, approaching. A helicopter appeared above the trees and landed in the clearing. People in uniform jumped out, rangers, police officers with weapons. They shouted and ordered James to stop and drop the knife. James stopped, looked at the helicopter, at the people, and understood that it was all over. He dropped the knife, sank to his knees, and covered his face with his hands. The police officers ran up, overpowered him, put him in handcuffs, and led him away. Amanda lay on the ground and cried, not from pain, but from relief, because she realized that it was truly over, that she was free, that the nightmare was over. A paramedic ran to her, helped her up, hugged her, and said that everything was okay, that she was safe. She was flown by helicopter to a hospital in Port Angeles, the nearest city. There, doctors examined her and documented injuries, signs of violence, scars from a chain around her ankle, bruises of varying ages, exhaustion, dehydration. A psychologist spoke with her, diagnosed post-traumatic stress disorder, and said that long-term treatment would be necessary. The police took her statement. Amanda told everything: the abduction, the captivity, the rapes, the life in the cabin over 3 years. The investigators wrote everything down. With every word, their faces grew darker. They told her that James Carter had been arrested, charged with kidnapping, rape, and unlawful imprisonment, and that he faced life in prison. Amanda's family flew in from Seattle. The reunion was tearful. Her mother and father could not believe that their daughter was alive. They hugged and kissed her and cried. Amanda cried too. For the first time in 3 years, she felt like a human being again and not like a prisoner, not like an object. The trial took place a year later, in November 2011. James Carter stood trial on multiple charges. Amanda testified and described everything she had been through. James's lawyer tried to prove that he was not criminally responsible and presented evidence of mental disorders and depression. But the psychiatric evaluation found him competent and capable of being held responsible for his actions. The jury returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced James Carter to 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole. As James was led out of the courtroom, he looked at Amanda and whispered something, but she did not hear it and did not want to hear it. It was the last time she ever saw him. After the trial, Amanda tried to return to a normal life. She moved from Seattle to another city, changed her name, began therapy, and joined a support group for victims of violence. She worked on her recovery, both physically and psychologically. The process was long and painful, but gradually she began to feel better. In 2013, she gave interviews to several journalists and told her story publicly. She wanted people to know that such things can happen, that even in a national park, a place considered safe, predators can be hiding. She wanted to warn other women who hike alone to be cautious, not to blindly trust people in uniform, to check identification, and to tell someone their routes. The National Park Service conducted an internal investigation and found that James Carter was indeed a ranger and had worked in the park for 20 years, but in recent years had become increasingly withdrawn, avoided colleagues, and spent much time alone on patrol. No one had thought he was capable of such acts. The cabin where he held Amanda was an old, abandoned wooden hut not marked on modern maps. James knew about it and used it as a hideout. After the incident, new rules were introduced. Rangers must patrol in pairs, undergo regular psychological evaluations, and tourists, especially women, are advised to hike in groups. But the park is enormous, about 3,000 square kilometers, and it is impossible to fully control it. Today, many years later, Amanda lives a normal life. She works, has a family and children, but the scars remain, both physical and psychological. She has never gone hiking again, avoids forests, and feels uncomfortable in enclosed spaces. She regularly sees a therapist and takes medication for depression and PTSD.